So wow, that kind of happened. Even though it's been over a year since I last talked about Fairy Tail, I figured I'd owe it to you guys to talk about where I'm at right now. I mean, I'll be honest, I really didn't expect something like this to happen, which I guess the only proper response I could give right now is a thanks, and please stick around, I guess, because I really didn't intend for that Fairy Tail video to be as long as it was and as in-depth as it was. But since I've been kind of aimless with what to do for projects, I figured I'd go back and talk about this show that apparently means a lot to a lot of my audience. I'll be honest, when I saw that video blow up, I really thought about just turning into a full-on Fairy Tail channel and only talking about that kind of stuff, since that's clearly what would get me a lot of attention. But since I kind of burned myself out from the show after having written and recorded and edited that entire video myself, I took a step back and decided to talk about some other stuff for a while before getting back into the show. And now I'm finally back, and I kind of wish I didn't come back. I'm sorry to say, but I couldn't finish the Oracion Seis arc. I talked about it at length in my last video, but I feel like there's certain times when this show can really fall into doing stuff very bad. And what I saw of the Oracion Seis arc, it was even worse than the Phantom Lord arc. I've tried to steer my channel away from negative style videos, mostly because I feel like that doesn't really help anybody. I mean, seriously, if I were to make a video about the Marvels talking about how it was one of the worst movies I saw in 2023, what value would I realistically be adding to the world? But this is something I just need to talk about, mostly because I feel like I owe it to you guys, seeing as how well that video did. I just need to explain where my headspace is at with this show that clearly is very important to me. And that's something I want you guys to know, because I do really like this show. I want it to be good. Going into this arc, I was coming off of the heels of the Battle of Fairy Tail arc, which in my opinion is a very good arc that I enjoyed quite a lot. I was full on stuck in there, right inside of Natsu's abs, oiled up and ready to go. So for me to sit here and say that I couldn't even finish the show is kind of hard for me. I'll be honest, I didn't even want to make this video because I didn't have a lot to talk about, seeing as how I didn't even finish the entire arc. But ultimately, if I'm not going to talk about the show ever again, and I feel let down, I feel like I owe it to you guys to at least just say that so you understand where I'm at right now. All I'm going to say is, if you love this show and you love this arc, then please be respectful to what I'm about to say. All the more power to you. I'm so happy that you have something that you love. But I just think I need to explain why I stopped watching Fairy Tail. In my opinion, there are 3 key things that are wrong with the Oracion Seis arc: the characters, the writing, and the pacing. I'll try and avoid talking about the animation here, mostly because I don't really have anything to say about that. I think it is perfectly serviceable, but it is still indicative of its time. So let's move into the first thing that's wrong with this arc, and that's the characters. Most of what this has to do with is all of the new characters. I still love the Natsu squad and think all 5 of them have very well pronounced personalities. They strike a good balance of having very simple, easily recognizable character traits and character themes, but still being layered and deep in their own way. Much like I said in the last video, Natsu and Gray are the budding shonen rivals, Happy is the comic relief, Lucy is the everyman audience surrogate character, and Ursa is the silent stoic badass. The reason why these characters work aren't necessarily because they're super deep, it's how they interact with each other. For instance, the reason why the Tower of Heaven arc works so well is because it takes a character like Ursa, a mysterious badass wizard, and flips her personality on its head by showing us more of her backstory, which gets us to see other emotions come out of her. This is what the best arcs of Season 1 did, focus in on a single character. If none of these characters are really the focus or the main driving force, then all that's really left is for them to be their standard kooky selves. They go from being archetypical characters that can subvert their archetypes to just being the archetype. And that is exactly what happens in this arc. Since there's no character focus, all our characters are left to do is just kind of hang out and do what they're told. Even really important critical character moments like Leon and Gray fighting together feel undercut for pacing reasons that I'll get to later. Oh, and I will just say, I do like this fight quite a fair bit. I think this might be my favorite part of the arc. But the point that I got to, which by the way was this episode, it just kind of felt like nothing interesting was happening, and our characters were just kind of aimlessly moving around without any goal or understanding of what was happening. And I was expected to watch an entire season of this, but I suppose that brings us into talking about all of the new characters. And while I don't think they're necessarily bad in a vacuum, my god, there are way too many of them. I mean, we have Wendy, the Cat Girl, the Three Stooges, a knockoff Mineta, a knockoff Gojo, and then all of the villains. And much like the main cast, they fall into very clear archetypes that again would be fine if they were done in a vacuum. But all of these characters layered on top of each other just make the entire story feel overbloated. Like when Natsu and Gray are fighting to try and go find Wendy, which you know is the main objective of where the show is at. We have to keep cutting back over to where the two fuckboys and perfume guy is at for some reason. And because you got so much to do, that means other characters just don't have anything to do. I've mentioned before that I believe in Lucy Hartfilia's supremacy, and she is my favorite character of the main cast. So imagine my disappointment when all she has to do for the beginning couple episodes is just kneel beside Urza as she's literally dying. I don't know, you could like hold her hand, tell her it's gonna be okay, hug her, I don't know, she might actually just fucking die there and you're just sitting there doing nothing. But of course we can't actually have Lucy do anything since we have to cut over to the perfume guy hilariously getting eaten, because yeah, that's funny. Or we have to see Wendy having the most forced internal conflict ever made because we don't have any context for why it's an internal conflict. Like Wendy keeps talking about this ominous thing that Jalal did for her and all this special thing and how it's tearing her apart inside, but I don't fucking know what she's talking about. When Peter Parker looks at his reflection and musters up the strength to pull himself up even after crying for help, I know what he's going through. There was an entire movie's worth of build-up to this point. Whereas when Wendy says this,
I have to repay him. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him.
I have no idea what she's talking about. I have no reason to feel anything in this scene. And it's not like there's any actual tension here since we know what's gonna happen. Since if she didn't revive Jalal, there would be no story. Going back to Marvel, this would be like the equivalent if we spent half of Infinity War wondering if Thanos was gonna go after the stone. I know what is going to happen, and I just want it to get there. Mostly because I'm fucking confused, since there is no effort made to explain what happened to Jalal or what's going on with him. Which I think is kind of important, since the last time we saw him, he fucking exploded. Or if you want to take what happened at the Battle of Fairy Tail arc, he was a completely different person. Like you have these two separate endings for this one character that you can go off of, and you pick neither of them. And you know, I think when this guy is supposed to be the main driving antagonist for your entire arc, I think you kind of need to explain what happened to him. Because when Jalal betrays the bad guys and goes off on his own, I'm not glued to the screen wondering what happened to him. I'm just confused about if this was the same guy from the Tower of Heaven, or if this is Mystigan, or if Mystigan's somewhere else. Who's on first? Where's the beef? And then we go back to Wendy, who's just insufferable. I mean, she has no actual positive character traits that make her a good character. She's just kind of shy and scared. Sure, that might be a good place to take a character and give them development, but you also have to actually make me interested in them before I want to see them get developed. I don't know if they just thought that her being a Dragon Slayer was enough for us to get on board with her, which really isn't that interesting, seeing as how we're dropping Dragon Slayers left and right around here. It's a reign in Dragon Slayers, what can I say? And again, maybe if we'd had build-up for what Wendy's actually going through, maybe this would be more interesting. But since I have no idea what's going on with her, I don't care. And before you say anything, yes, I do fully believe that these questions will be answered at some point. But there's a difference between creating an intriguing mystery and not giving your audience proper context. There is no context for what happened, and this would be fine if Wendy was an endearing character. Sure, we don't know what happened to Urza at the beginning of the Tower of Heaven arc, but the difference is that we have spent so much time with Urza at this point in the show. We have built a genuine friendship with this character. So when more questions begin to be proposed about her past, we feel intrigued to learn them because we are more inclined to trust this character. Meanwhile, all Wendy's done up to this point is whine, complain, get captured, and get her ass kicked. And I'm sure she'll probably become a better character down the line, but there's a reason why character introduction is the most important part of creating your character. Captain Jack Sparrow sailing into Port Royal, or Star-Lord dancing to Redbone. These moments are not only entertaining, but they're also informative since they tell us everything we need to know about the characters. What does Wendy's introduction tell me about her character? She's clumsy, cowardly, weak, whiny, and has no backbone. And yes, it is important for characters to have weaknesses and flaws, but they also need to actually be able to do stuff. Natsu can be a bit dense at times and get in over his head, but he's also wickedly strong and insanely loyal. Gray's a bit of a party pooper and too stubborn for his own good, but he's also a very committed character that sticks up for what he believes in. Lucy's the weakest character in combat, but she's also the character with the biggest heart and the most amount of compassion out of the entire cast. Finally, Urza's very stoic and unwilling to open up to other people, but she uses that stoicism to cover up for how much she genuinely cares about other people. What I'm getting at is these characters all have their flaws, but they also have their strengths to balance them out. Wendy is nothing but flaws, and it only gets more annoying when she's put front and center of every episode. If she was an endearing character, then this arc would be much better. It would be similar to the arcs that I mentioned at the beginning in Season 1, because those ones focus on a single character's journey. We can focus on Wendy's journey, but if she's not a good character, then I don't really care what happens to her. And since pretty much all of the other characters are kind of just reduced to quirks or archetypes, there's not really much else to talk about. So when I say writing, I mean how the script is laid out. One of the big things to talk about is obviously the humor of the show. I haven't brought it up till now because I feel like it's kind of annoying sometimes. I'll be real quick about this because the problem with the humor is very simple in that the joke just doesn't stop. Like, one of the first bits of humor we get is when the team's meeting up and these three fuckboys are trying to hit on Lucy. And okay, I mean, that's a joke. It's not a funny one, but it's certainly a joke. But then the episode continues, and as we meet more of the team, we just keep cutting back to Lucy and these guys being awkward. And it just doesn't stop, and they're not trying to say anything new or add any new funny circumstances. It's literally just the same joke that these guys are attracted to Lucy and she's acting flustered. You see, there's this idea in comedy that you can only ever make one joke 3 times in a story before it becomes old. Comedy comes in threes, baby. But in most circumstances, when you do something like this, you kind of spread it out over the course of, say, a 2-hour movie or a couple episodes of a show. You don't do the same joke 3 times in one scene, because that's just ridiculous. And that's just one example. There's countless other examples of jokes that they just keep doing. Uh-oh, Happy likes the new cat girl, but she thinks he's stupid. Okay. The ugly perfume guy loves Urza and she's acting all flustered. Okay. And I could go on from there. Yeah, so you might notice that those other 2 jokes that I mentioned were basically the exact same as the first one. It involves one character or multiple characters being attracted to somebody and then the wacky antics that ensue from said reaction. So when you tell that one joke 3 different times over 3 different sets of characters, it kind of stops being funny. I'll move away from the humor and start talking about the actual scene-by-scene writing of this season. And to do so, I'm going to say one of the single most hot-button and misunderstood topics in the entire history of film and television criticism. Filler. Now, to the uninitiated, filler basically means parts of a show, it can be a scene or a whole episode, that don't really have anything to do with the main plot. At least that's how I define it. The problem with using filler as a criticism is that it's a word that inherently means something different to tons of different other people. So it's hard for some people to understand what you're really talking about. For an example, one of the most famous quote-unquote filler episodes is The Great Divide from Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you watch the episode before this and you watch the episode after this, you'll notice that nothing in this episode really matters to the overall story. The episode does tell a story, and there's character progressions and scene progressions, but once the episode's over, it doesn't really have any effect on any of the characters or the plot. These episodes are filler because they just fill in gaps in the story, but they don't actually add anything. Now, Fairy Tail is a show that famously does have quite a bit of filler. I mean, you can even look at the first couple episodes of Season 2 as filler. I mean, just look at the episode Watch Out for the Guy You Like. This is an entertaining, but ultimately pointless episode. There is no plot, and nothing that happens in this episode affects the main characters. But it's also important to note that filler can sometimes work. The best example I can really think of off the top of my head is almost every episode of Cowboy Bebop. To many, Cowboy Bebop can feel like a very weird show and kind of bad, since it's basically just a Monster of the Week show where it's about the Bebop crew going after a different criminal every episode. It's only episodes like Jupiter Jazz or Ballad of Fallen Angels that deal more with a lot of Spike's personal stuff. So does this just mean that the entire show is filler? No, and that's for two key reasons. Firstly, there needs to be a distinction made between an episode that develops a character and an episode that advances the plot. In my opinion, the most basic form of storytelling can be boiled down to advance the plot and develop the characters. And as long as you're doing both of those things in an entertaining way, you're gonna do a pretty good job. And almost every single one of these episodes of Cowboy Bebop does such a good job of developing character. Since we're not really worried about any overarching plot over the course of the entire show, we just kind of have time to sit with these characters and watch them suffer. I mean, hell, that's what the entire show is about. You can make the argument that Cowboy Bebop is filler. Spike Spiegel, Jet Black, Faye Valentine, these are all characters with nothing left to live for. Spike especially is a character who feels aimless, like there's nothing left living for and is just kind of coasting day to day. The show is meant to feel like filler because that's all Spike's life is now. Hey, remember when we were talking about Fairy Tail? I took that whole detour to talk about Cowboy Bebop and filler in particular because I need you to understand that when I say that most of this arc is filler, I mean it in a very weird way. Obviously, this story does have an overarching plot and character development and character moments. Sure, I may not like a lot of those character moments, but they are there nonetheless. So why can I get off on saying most of this arc is filler? Well, because even though this arc has a plot, it just takes way too long to get to it. Hey, real quick editing note here. Saying it takes too long I think was a mistake on my part. A more accurate way of phrasing my criticism is that this arc feels unfocused. There is no central plot or objective the characters seem to be moving towards. I will elaborate on this further into this script, but I wanted to make this note as I felt what I was saying was not actually accurate and there were better ways of phrasing it. Like I didn't want anybody to think that I was just an impatient child sitting there waiting for the next action scene. Anyway, back to the actual video. Like when we're on the run to try to get Wendy and save her from the bad guys, this seems like a very simple go here, get this plot. But the thing is, there's a lot of us, and that would be way too easy. So instead, we have to like call out these weird henchmen guys that aren't characters so that we can have a fight. And this is like the worst kind of action in any story because there's no reason for there to be an action scene here. When you break down action and storytelling, there always has to be either a character or a plot reason for it to happen. The reason why the church scene in Kingsman is so effective isn't just because it's a fun, entertaining, gory long take set to Freebird. It's because it actually has a place in the story, since this is the moment when the audience finally gets to see what the main villain Valentine's plan is. We've had a bit of a spy mystery building up till now, trying to figure out what's been going on with this guy, and now we finally see what it all means in a very bloody fashion. Plus, it also serves as the final send-off for the character Harry before he, you know... This scene basically being a much more interesting and energetic version of the Obi-Wan Vader fight in A New Hope. That felt weird. I hate speaking about Star Wars in a positive light. And you know, most of this season of Fairy Tail really does feel kind of like just aimless fighting. There's only like 2 fights that I think actually have a storytelling point. The opening fight with the Oracion Seis is pretty good. I think this fight actually works really well because we need to establish the power levels of the villains as well as their personalities to get to know them for later. And taking out the Pegasus ship is a very good choice since it effectively stacks the deck against the heroes and immediately puts a loss on them. You know, making it harder for them to win. Even if this fight is still like a little hilariously one-sided, like, I mean, most of the time the heroes should kind of have a disadvantage because that's just better storytelling, but like, they don't gotta be this incompetent. I mean, shit, Natsu was doing stuff like this last week. Are you seriously telling me he's blowing up like this? My man is choking harder than Punk out here.
We need our more forward drivers to get this started.
And then the Leon, Gray, and Racer fight is actually pretty good. Since, you know, this fight is what the entire arc was supposed to be about. I mean, we set up from the very beginning that the whole point of this was to take out the Oracion Seis. And this is like the first time since that opening battle that we're actually like moving towards that goal, because we have to constantly split off and do other stuff. Urza gets poisoned, so we gotta go save Wendy to save her. And look, I get that Urza's like really strong and powerful and everything, and I don't have a problem with the writers taking her out of the story to make the main characters weak, but this is literally the exact same thing you did during the Phantom Lord arc. You thought we wouldn't notice, but we did. You know, if there were more fights and more scenes in this arc that were like the racer fight, I think I'd like it a bit more. One point I've always tried to get across is that Fairy Tail is not a very complex show, and that's when it works. I mean, the plot that was set up about this arc was literally just our heroes going and fighting this group of bad guys that are kind of weird and kooky. And sure, while that might not seem like the kind of story that could deliver a cinematic experience, that's basically the exact same plot as Enter the Dragon. That's something that I've noticed happens a lot with Fairy Tail, where the story just kind of gets ahead of itself, introducing too many characters, too many plot points, and then bogging down the entire narrative because nothing's properly being focused on. Again, Fairy Tail's at its best when it's focusing on a single character and their journey. And ultimately, I feel like this is just too big to fail. I was thinking about going very in-depth on some of the subtler pacing issues I have with this arc, but I think I mostly covered my big problem with the way it chops up the plot into little bite-sized pieces and gives us little mini-quests that dilute the entire quest, to the point that the GSU, with goals, stakes, and urgency, are constantly in flux. Almost to the point that the characters don't even seem to understand who they're fighting or what they're fighting for. And if you're gonna make an entire season of a show that's nothing but fighting, and you don't even let your characters properly understand why they're fighting, yeah, I think that's a problem. I honestly don't want to talk about this arc anymore. There's a lot more that I could rant about, but I really don't want to. As I said in the beginning, I do like this show, and it just saddens me to see the state it's in. But honestly, I think that's okay. We all have our ups and downs, and sometimes some things just don't work for us. You could almost say it's not you, it's me. I've honestly just reached a point where something as mindlessly entertaining as Fairy Tail really needs to do something to grab my attention. And this arc was just far too unengaging, confusing, and uninteresting to really hook me. And that's why I couldn't finish the Oracion Seis arc. Hey, so this is a completely unscripted outro that I'm just kind of doing off the top of my head because I feel like I kind of need to explain what happened with this video. This was kind of a train wreck to get produced. I mean, if I'm being honest, I had all kinds of technical problems between having to change editing softwares halfway through, between having to re-record all of the footage because half of it got deleted, script rewrites, re-recording lines. That was certainly a contributing factor to why this video took so long to get out. I mean, just as a frame of reference, I wanted this to be out in January, which obviously didn't happen. But even more than that, I just kind of lost all enthusiasm for the show. I said it earlier in the video, but I think I've just moved on from Fairy Tail. Honestly, I kind of think of it right now as like a bad ex-girlfriend. There was a time when I thought we were in love, and I'll always cherish those memories. But I just had to move on. I had to move on to other things that I liked more. I know that lack of enthusiasm is going to show through in the video, and that's really what made this video take so long. Sure, there was a plethora of technical problems, but above all, I just didn't want to talk about this show like this. I debated whether or not to just trash it, but at the very least, I thought you guys needed an explanation. Doing this takes a lot of work, and the only payment I really get is the enthusiasm for whatever I'm talking about. And if there isn't that enthusiasm, I don't have a huge incentive to do this. I always want to be honest on this channel and stay true to myself. I'm not going to just keep making Fairy Tail videos if I don't feel enthused by them anymore. I know this video is going to be disappointing for a lot of you, but all I ask again is to respect my opinion, and if you don't like what I put out, then please feel free to leave. I'd rather make my short little quick reviews on movies that I like than longer form videos on stuff that I don't. And honestly, that is the reason I couldn't finish Fairy Tail.